So I guess I should start by apologizing to Sebastian and the rest of you that were expecting some kind of Q&A. That was the original. That was what was originally scheduled. But I put together a talk about a month ago in Toronto, and this is the first time I've made a new talk in a few years, and I really like it, and so I wanted to give that again. And fortunately, I was nice enough to Jesse to get this kind of last-minute schedule rearrangements that I could give this talk. So I'm going to do that, and hope that you guys don't mind. And apologies to Sebastian for sabotaging his opportunity to Q&A me. Did any of you see this already a month ago?
Yes.
A few of you. Okay, but not that many. That's good. I was a little worried. Cool. So I'm Ethan. I'm currently the technical director at the Interchain Foundation, also vice president on the council, and helping move things along there, the grant program, and working on Tendermint and IBC and all this other stuff. But what I want to talk about is this larger concept of stakeholders and state machines, right? And to get kind of right into it, this is the idea that let's take this conference as an example. And first of all, this is amazing. I think super excited that everyone's here. So thank you all for coming, and huge thanks to the people that made this happen, to Jesse, to Michelle, to Anna, Sophie, and everyone else that really did the hard work to put this together. But the point is, this conference has a lot of stakeholders, right? There's something like over 70 different entities involved here. There's the speakers, there's the audience members, there's caterers, security, AV, there's full node, right? So there's a lot of stakeholders in this. And what's happened here is these stakeholders have all come together to create something that's kind of larger than the sum of their parts, right? To create some new kind of stateful entity, this conference, right? It's stateful, it has a state. There's a current state of the conference, which is me up here rambling on about state, and there are inputs and outputs and things that change the state. And kind of the point of the state machine is really to enable these stakeholders to come together and to do something for kind of their mutual benefit, right? That somehow benefits all of them. And ideally, this process of like a state machine, working for the interests of stakeholders works best when the stakeholders are kind of well represented in the state machine, right? So when the people that care, stakeholders are generally one way or another, people that care about an outcome, people that care about the state, people that care about how it changes. These things work best when the stakeholders are well represented in the state machine. I think we have done a good job here of representing different stakeholder groups and kind of working that in. Of course, state machines are much more general than just conferences. I mean, once you start thinking in terms of state machines, you see them everywhere. It's potentially a liability to see them everywhere. But, especially working in the blockchain space, every blockchain application is somehow a state machine. It's increasingly a concerning question of how well do the state machines of our blockchains represent the stakeholders that they're allegedly, working in the interest of, right? And so if you think about kind of traditionally, how has society managed this problem of state machines representing stakeholders? What is kind of the most common state machine vehicle that we use for this? Is really the corporation, right? And the corporation is this 300-year-old entity that is an independent state machine, right? It holds some state. It's got the state of its books, employees, directors, contracts it's engaged in, and so on. And there's a large group of stakeholders that actually care about what that corporation is up to. But the challenge is with the corporate state machine is that the only stakeholders that are really well represented in the state of the corporate state machine are the shareholders, right? They're those with kind of a expected financial return, with a financial interest in the state machine. And so all these other larger stakeholders are much less poorly represented, right? And so of course, this has led, a lot of people are coming to terms with this, and this has led to a huge rebellion, say, against kind of shareholder-based capitalism. A lot of people wake up in the morning to, motivated to slam the patriarchy and abolish capitalism and all this kind of stuff. And I don't think anyone in this room, really kind of understands that maybe that's a little bit naive, and there are other things we can explore, like for instance, nonprofit foundations, right? And so we went, we happen to have one of these things, Swiss Nonprofit Foundation, but there are others. There are other kind of approaches to this. And one thing I think that's kind of interesting, and kind of funny, when thinking about, when I was trying to understand foundations and how they work, and what other examples might be, I came across these guys. So this is the corporate group for IKEA. What's cool about IKEA is they have not one but two European foundations at the top, right? So all you looking to set something up, you might want to consult this and understand really what's going on here. I have no idea. I have no idea why they went through all this complexity. But talk about squad goals. So, I mean, the issue, ultimately the issue is that the founder of IKEA must have felt that the corporate state machine wasn't sufficient to represent the larger stakeholders of the IKEA project, right? And whether he's benevolent or not, I guess it really remains to be seen. This was the structure that he and his comrades put together to kind of better represent the interests of the stakeholders in the IKEA system. It involves all this complexity. Another thing this kind of illustrates really nicely, though, and that corporations illustrate, which I think is a little bit more general about state machines and stakeholders, is there's this kind of recursion, right? Something that's a state machine at one level can be a stakeholder at a next, right? And you see that kind of very, very clearly in the sense that, when you have a parent corporation, it's a corporation, so it's still a state machine, but it's a stakeholder in its child, right? And you can think about, the state machine here of this conference, that we're all stakeholders in. You can think about that state machine as this conference as a stakeholder in full node, right? And if we happen to do this conference every year, we do it in full node. Full node is this kind of larger state machine that has all these things going on with different stakeholders in it, right? And you get this kind of recursion. And so it's interesting to think about, how state machines at one level represent stakeholders at other levels, right? And where the best place for the representation of a particular group of stakeholders really belongs. And so, so this is what IKEA did. We have something not nearly as complex for now, to my great dismay. But part of the problem here. So there's other approaches, right? Kind of a standard posited solution to these kinds of issues of stakeholder representation in corporate state machines is cooperatives, right? And so cooperative is a kind of corporation, but instead of being governed by shareholders and by equity-based voting rights, it's governed by members, right? So you have a group of members in the cooperative, and each member gets one vote. You get this kind of much more democratic organization, and that way the members are represented directly in the state machine of the cooperative as the people with the voting rights, right? And so you have different kinds of cooperatives, worker cooperatives, consumer cooperatives, and so on. But it's kind of well known that cooperatives happen to be they're more sustainable than traditional corporations. They tend to last longer. They have less employee turnover. They seem to be a much more successful vehicle for passing on a corporation from, say, one generation to the next, and you turn it into a worker co-op, it tends to succeed better. But there's a common conception that, and it's probably true actually, that because of this kind of much more democratic process for running a cooperative, it's potentially a lot slower and a lot less innovative, right? And stuck in deadlock a little bit more, right? And this might be true. And kind of in comparison, I was like, well, so we need a corporation because a corporation is where we can actually be innovative and have some top-down control a little bit better, right? And actually go do crazy things. And you see this kind of play out. I mean, even seeing GitHub get acquired by Microsoft and kind of the change in control that happened there, and how much better GitHub has gotten because of small changes or large changes to the kind of hierarchical structure there that kind of broke a bunch of deadlocks. Suddenly GitHub is super innovative again, and we're getting all these new features, and it's really great. But so while this might be true that in general you kind of have corporations as more innovative vehicles, and maybe co-ops as more sustainable vehicles, it seems we've kind of overshot on the corporation and on the innovation front, right? And now we have this insane amount of innovation that's not really grounded in anything kind of meaningful, right? So you get companies coming up like Juicero that are making juice boxes or easily squeezable juice. Nobody needs that. It's not innovation that's really benefiting anyone, right? And so sure enough, they go out of business. And so it kind of seems to me that we really need both of these, and we need them in the right interplay. And you still want innovative corporations, and you want sustainable co-ops. And what you really want to support the kind of innovative corporations is a better foundation of cooperatives, providing kind of more of the world's, say, basic services and so on. But okay, that's one man's opinion. But there's also there's a major problem with doing any of this kind of stuff and implementing any kind of interesting governance procedure in a real, legitimate, legal corporate structure, which is that it's very hard. Actually managing these corporations and even understanding what state they're in, right? And knowing kind of if they're even valid and keeping the books in a workable and legible and compilable state. There's no real concept of that. The only way to do it really is you hire accountants and lawyers. And you ask the lawyer a question, and they tell you have to ask the accountant. You ask the accountant a question, they tell you have to ask the lawyer. And so, short of flying them all into the same room, you can't get straight answers. Or you pay them thousands of dollars, they give you the wrong answer. And it's how do you know that your corporation is actually in a legitimate, valid state, right? This is kind of an opportunity for me to plug what I think is the necessary future of corporate state, which is obviously open source, but I also think increasingly plain text oriented, right? We want our corporations and our organizations to be actually understandable, to be able to look at the thing and be able to see it and process it and as a human and as a machine, right? The same way that things like JSON have kind of transformed the ability for people to understand APIs, to work with them cleanly, both as human and as machine. I think we need to do the same thing for corporations and corporate organizations and corporate state. And this is very possible because you want to be able to query your corporation. Like, what state is my corporation in? I have to call a lawyer or an accountant to figure that out, or I guess have someone like Ariane and call her and ask her, and she probably knows the state of the corporation pretty well, right? But so I'm obsessed with this problem because the more involved I get with corporations, the more amazed I am that they're allowed to exist at all. Because they're all pretty much in an invalid state. They don't compile. It's like, imagine you're writing code, and you just never try to compile it. You're just like, here's my code, I implemented Tendermint. Did you compile it? No, I don't need to compile it, I just wrote the code. It's like, this is what we do with corporations. It's like the only time you try to compile is when you go public. It takes companies longer and longer to go public, probably because there's so much more invalid stuff to clean up. They have to pay more. So this is not an acceptable circumstance to me, right? And I'm, if the aliens come down and they're looking at the world, I'm going to be ashamed of one thing, it's this, right? And then I talk to people from the Valley that have been building companies for 30 years, and to not address this problem first, Anyways, so I'm going to solve this, and I hope you are willing to help me. And don't mock me. Okay, so here, here's where we're going to start. This is software called BeanCount. How many of you know about NewCash? NewCash, yeah. So NewCash is open source double entry bookkeeping software. It's got a very nice user interface, and this is where I start. When I came to understand what bookkeeping was and that it was hard and I had to learn some stuff. I was like, okay, well, let me find an open source tool to do this. And you did it with NewCash, and it was kind of a nightmare, and I got frustrated with it. And eventually, I found this idea of plain text accounting. It already exists. It's existed for years. And basically it lets you keep all of your books in full-on double-entry bookkeeping in a plain text file. It looks just like that. You can read it as a human, and there's a tool that you can use to compile it. Your books compile. They balance, not because someone checked it, not because you paid thousands of dollars to, for proprietary software by criminal organizations like Intuit. It's because there's no, seriously, this is a definition of a criminal organization. They lobby the government to make this as hard as possible for people to ensure their shareholder interests, right? It's because the corporate state machine of Intuit does not adequately represent the stakeholders, all the people doing bookkeeping, they all just get completely screwed by them, lobbying the government. So we're not going to stand for this. So I have been doing all of my personal and Canadian corporate accounting in BeanCount for the last 2 years, to the great dismay of my accountants. So this is why I'm always looking for every role I need help with. It has to be someone who's an accountant but also knows how to program, a lawyer that knows how to program, a recruiter knows how to program. But one of the really nice things about BeanCount, besides how pretty it is, and this is in Vim, it already comes with with the formatter and the colors and all this. It has a UI, and you can do everything from the UI, and the UI is beautiful. The UI is called Fava, and I managed to convince Sunny over there to go down this rabbit hole, and so Sunny has adopted BeanCount, and he's claims to be using it for his validator soon, and so on. So I encourage you to take a look at this if you were involved at all in bookkeeping or accounting, or care about the problem of knowing that your corporation is valid and destroying Intuit's empire. Okay, let's get back to the regularly scheduled programming here. So talking about stakeholders and state machines, and this is a slide I've been using for a while. Of course, in this version, Ariane appears. In previous versions, she hasn't. We'll talk about that in a second. What's happening here is that every one of these images represents some kind of distributed state. And typically when I talk about this, I'm always talking about distributed state, these amazing